Now, what do you suggest we do? Spank it.
Star Trek the Motion Picture is certainly a divisive movie. It has its fans, me included, but it really isn't one for the wider audiences as a crowd pleaser. The pacing has a lot to do with it being referred to as the slow motion or motionless picture. That said, there is a lot to enjoy within this film, with the visual effects, the score and the overall production value. It is a quality looking film. It looks even better on Blu-ray and 4K with the re-edits of the director's cut from 2001. However, the birth of this movie is stuff of legend. I'm pretty sure that the majority of people will probably know this, but for those who don't, here's a quick overview of the origins of this film. Please note, I'm not going to go into everything because that's probably a video all on its own. Star Trek was cancelled at the end of its third season in 1969, without any formal ending. It was doomed to failure as the series was moved to a 10 PM time slot on a Friday night, the graveyard slot as it was referred to, when a lot of viewers were either too young to stay up that late or were just out enjoying their Friday nights. The writing was on the wall, written by the studio themselves. The quality of the third season was a downgrade from the first two, but
as we say on Earth, c'est la vie.
The show gained renewed popularity when it entered syndication. For those on this side of the pond, if you don't know, syndication is when the rights to a TV show are leased to a more localised broadcaster. Due to the size of the US and different time zones, etc., it allowed for TV stations to pick and choose when the series aired, catering for a more local demographic. On a national scale, this helped to renew the series' popularity. Conventions also started to become a thing, with the first Star Trek convention taking place in January of 1972. An animated series debuted in 1973 to almost pick up where the live-action series left off, serving as the fourth and fifth years of the 5-year mission, well, unofficially anyway. This did give fans their Star Trek fix, but it wasn't enough, so executives at Paramount debated what to do next with the franchise to capitalise on Star Trek's popularity. Everything from a big-budget cinematic movie to a series to a one-off film of the week special were discussed, with scripts even being developed. Gene Roddenberry had written a script called The God Thing. Some story elements were later used in Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, much to Roddenberry's displeasure.
What does God need with a starship?
Another script was penned called Planet of the Titans, written by Chris Bryant, Alan Scott and Philip Kaufman, but again, this didn't make it beyond the pre-production phase, although there were concepts for the updated Enterprise created by Ralph McQuarrie. These concepts were used for study models of the Excelsior in Star Trek III, and later appeared in episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation as derelict ships, as well as formed the basis for the design of the USS Discovery. A sequel series was greenlit called Star Trek Phase 2, which was to be a flagship series on a new network. This actually happened with Star Trek Voyager years later. The majority of the original cast would return, with the exception of Leonard Nimoy, as he was in dispute with Paramount over unpaid royalties for likeness licensing on products and merchandise. So a new Vulcan character was conceived called Zon, to be played by David Galtrue. Hopefully I've pronounced his name right there, but apologies if not. He did come back to play a role in the motion picture on the Epsilon 9 station. Scripts were being written, sets were being fabricated, and model ships were being built, with characters being cast. There is a slight misconception that it was the release of Star Wars that was the catalyst for the series being cancelled in lieu of a movie, although there is some small truth in this. It was actually the release of Star Wars that prompted the series to go into production, because the studio executives didn't see the benefit of releasing another sci-fi movie so close to Star Wars. It was actually the success of Close Encounters of the Third Kind that proved that high-concept sci-fi can be profitable, coupled with the fact that Paramount realised that revenues from advertising for the Paramount television service just couldn't support a new network, a network that Phase 2 would be the flagship series on. The script for the two-part pilot called In Thy Image also lent itself to being a movie. The then Paramount president Michael Eisner declared that this story was what he'd been looking for a big-budget film. The budget for the series had already reached nearly $500,000, which was a lot of money in the late 70s, and the studio wanted a way to recoup these losses. The production of the series did continue for a short while until it just changed to the motion picture, with the pilot script becoming the basis of the plot for the film, a script that was edited and re-edited many times over during production. So Star Trek the Motion Picture was born. I only scratched the surface here, and it really is a fascinating story, so I've probably not done it full justice. But let's move on to the actual film that was finally released in December of 1979. There were certain elements from the series that carried over into the film, most notably the characters of Ilea and Decker, both still being played by Persis Kambata and Stephen Collins respectively. The bases of these characters were also used for Riker and Troy in The Next Generation. Some of the Phase 2 scripts were also reworked for The Next Generation, such as for The Child and Devil's Due. As sets were already being constructed for the series, these were also recycled for the film, but brand new Starship models were required to be built as the ones made for Phase 2 simply weren't suitable for a movie due to the reduced level of detail. So, as the contractors for the visual effects were unable to meet the demands of their schedules, Douglas Trumbull was brought in to provide the visual effects in time for the film's release, although he didn't really have a lot of time on his hands. Trumbull had a great track record of visual effects, having worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey. The effects for this film, as well as its pacing, is often compared to 2001 as inspiration. A new Enterprise was built, which was much more detailed and an advanced version of the one built for Phase 2. I do think the Phase 2 version does provide a bridge of evolution between the original Enterprise and the refit, but this is my absolute favourite version of the Enterprise. Seeing her in dry dock in this movie is a thing of beauty, if not in a long drawn out scene, but I love it anyway. The motion picture was directed by Robert Wise, an experienced director who was no stranger to sci-fi, having directed The Day the Earth Stood Still and The Andromeda Strain, as well as some classics such as West Side Story and The Sound of Music. A perfect fit, you'd argue. However, the constant changes to the script and the fact that post-production was only completed mere days before the movie's premiere did affect the finished film. And it wasn't until 2001, ironically, when we got the director's cut on DVD that only made it to Blu-ray and 4K in 2022. This for me is the definitive version of the film, with the updated special effects looking like they belong, not just gimmicky additions like with some of the additions to the original Star Wars trilogy. The motion picture isn't a heavily character-driven film, with it being more plot-driven. We do get some character development, but it's quite surface level. Kirk's arc is that he's been promoted to Admiral at Starfleet Operations, and he simply wants to stay in command of a starship. This is explored further in the next film. Here he gets his command back, but he's out of touch and needs to find his footing once again. This is evident with his clashes with Decker, whom he relieved of command. When we first see the newly refitted Enterprise, we get a sense of wonder at this beautiful ship. A ship that has so much history, but now with an updated look. We see this through Kirk's eyes. Although the scene is a little drawn out, it does help to hammer home how much the Enterprise means to Kirk, and that the only place he really wants to be is on the bridge of the Enterprise. It's almost like he's been reunited with a long-lost love. The score here from Jerry Goldsmith is truly amazing. The theme was liked that much by Roddenberry that he wanted to use it again for The Next Generation, and it was also used for Star Trek V. Over the years, this has become the definitive Star Trek theme. Some good news about the production was that Leonard Nimoy came to an agreement with Paramount and returned to the role of Spock. Spock probably has the biggest arc as he separated himself from Starfleet and is searching within himself. His very own little search for Spock, if you will. He's torn between two worlds as he also doesn't complete the Culinary discipline where all emotion is purged, so has become something of an outcast. His connection with V'Ger is what leads him down the path of self-discovery. Both he and V'Ger search for answers looking to better themselves and to find their place in the universe. Ultimately, Kirk and Spock have pretty much the same conclusion to their arcs. They're getting back to the characters that we knew at the end of the original series, as they are different people at the start of the film, becoming more familiar by the end. Decker also has a bit of an arc. He's pushed out of command by Kirk, something that he resents Kirk for, and feels that he needs to constantly battle with Kirk to prove that he's the much more suitable person to command the Enterprise. Kirk calls him out on this, but this back and forth helps to progress both characters during the film. Decker knows that he's more important but feels somewhat overlooked within Kirk's team. This is also coupled by the fact that he has to relinquish the role of science officer when Spock joins the crew. He has a past and deep connection with Ilea and blames Kirk somewhat for her loss when she's taken by V'Ger to be used as a representative to communicate with the crew of the Enterprise. By the end of the film, Decker wants to prove his worth by joining with V'Ger and allowing it to revolve, in turn being with his one true love Ilea, or at least that's how I see it anyway. As for the rest of the cast, well, they're just there. Sulu, Uhura, Chekhov and Scotty are still doing the jobs they were doing before. Yeoman Rand and Nurse Chapel are also there doing their jobs. Scotty certainly has the most to do throughout the first two acts of the film, but doesn't have much to do towards the end. As for McCoy, he has very little character development, but serves more as Kirk's guide as such. He is important to Kirk's arc and Spock's to an extent. He's almost like a conduit of sorts to both. Although McCoy's introduction is brilliant because he looks like he's just been beamed up from a 1970s disco. And he does have some great one-liners, my favourite being this.
Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?
The audience at the time hadn't seen these characters in nearly 10 years, so they served to give the film a little bit more familiarity. As I mentioned before, this is a very plot-driven film. Well, once the plot actually gets going, that is. It's nearly 40 minutes until the Enterprise leaves dry dock, and a good hour or so until they encounter the V'ger cloud as they try to iron out the issues with the Enterprise's engines and Spock's arrival. I did find all of this to be a bit pointless. Yes, it does show that they needed Spock, especially after the loss of Commander Sunak, who was pretty much Spock's replacement as science officer, but this wasn't overly necessary in my opinion because it does slow the film down quite a bit. Why are they the only ship in interception range? Especially with all the issues with their engines not being tested and not having a proper shakedown. Are there no other starships in the solar system, let alone in Earth orbit? If they're fully powered up and all systems good, then that would make more sense for the Enterprise to be sent to intercept. Spock could have still been introduced in a similar way, but I don't feel that it was needed to prove his worth by fixing the engines before heading off to give V'ger what for. Granted, I'm probably nitpicking there, but I stand by my opinion. Although slow and plodding, the visual effects are stunning, with Jerry Goldsmith's amazing score really giving life to what would be quite a dull film. I've mentioned this in a 5 facts about the motion picture short on our channel recently about a fan theory where the Voyager 6 probe was assimilated by the Borg and sent back to Earth. I actually quite like this fan theory. Spock also says this.
Any show of resistance would be futile.
Although not canon, it was used as a plot device in some Shatner novels. I find it interesting, but it could be viewed as making the universe feel much smaller, just like what's become of the Star Wars universe with everything being connected. The main plot is also very similar in concept to a TOS Season 2 episode, The Changeling, where a man-made probe is sent out to the depths of space to collect information, colliding and merging with a life form and becoming sentient, looking to fulfill its programming. Very similar to V'ger. I might be on my own here, but I do find the plot to be quite confusing in places, especially the ending. What became of V'ger and Decker? What did they evolve into and where? Spock did say that they maybe ended up in a different plane of existence or alternate universe or something, but that just rubber stamped that Roddenberry and Livingston had no idea how to end this film and just left it open-ended. Yes, they stopped V'ger from destroying the Earth and allow it to complete its programming, but it still left me with more questions than answers. Or maybe I'm just thick. In summary, I do think that the motion picture is an important entry into the movie series, even if future movies went in a different direction going forwards. The odd-numbered movies being bad is a myth to me, which I'm hoping to prove in future reviews, if not this one. But ultimately, Star Trek the Motion Picture is a must-watch for any Star Trek fan and any fan of high-concept sci-fi. Upon release, the film was met with mixed reviews, although was profitable. Paramount viewed this movie as a failure because of the mixed reception, but did make $139 million on a $44 million budget. Although that budget did increase during production, but that's not too shabby for the late 70s. Studio executives blame the outcome on Roddenberry himself, moving him into a consultant role on future films, giving him little to no power over productions. This film did, however, help to establish some aspects moving forwards, such as the look and style of the ships of that era, the vertical warp core, the look of the Klingons, which was done simply because they could afford to make them look more alien and warlike, the style of the musical scores, and the overall aesthetics of the world building of the future. I feel that the legacy of this film is somewhat muffled. To anyone who isn't an avid Star Trek fan, this is a movie written off as boring and not worth watching, but to me as a fan, I think it's a very good film. There are heavy themes explored within the movie addressing such things as the importance of one's self-worth, discovering your own place in the universe, and the importance of life in general, which I find fascinating, as Spock would say. And I think this is a film worth revisiting now and again. Many thanks for watching this week's Throwback Thursday on Star Trek the Motion Picture. I've been Colm from the Critical Cinema Club, and I'll see you again very soon.
That away.